My name is Summer. Right now I'm on the receiving end of a tirade from my mother-in-law over the phone. Why on earth is the house gone? What in the world were you thinking doing something like this? My mother-in-law complained, without listening to my side of the story. She doesn't seem to realize she's the one at fault. I let out a sigh. That must have ticked her off because her voice gets even louder. You better explain to me exactly where you turned that house into an empty lot. Well, let me start from the beginning. I decided to give my mother-in-law a full account of what led to this. The story takes us back to when I was a college student. My long-lived grandfather passed away, and a dispute over his inheritance had erupted in our family. It wasn't a squabble over money, though. The issue was about what to do with Grandpa's old house. It would cost quite a bit to dispose of it. On the other hand, everyone in the family already owned a house or an apartment. Managing another property, my grandpa's house, seemed too much to ask. That's when the buck passing began. Even though the house was old, it was still livable, and the land that it sat on belonged to my grandpa too. Inheriting it could be a good asset, and it seemed perfect for someone wanting to live alone. That's when I volunteered to take over the house, with an enthusiastic, "Sure, go ahead," from everyone. The old house and land became mine, so while I was still a university student, I became the owner of a house and land. There were inheritance taxes, of course, but that was a separate matter. I temporarily borrowed money from my parents and worked part-time jobs to pay them back. By the time I graduated from university, the house and land were truly mine. After graduation, I started working at a publishing company. Then, a friend introduced me to a great guy, and we started dating. That's my husband, Robert. He agreed to live with me in my grandfather's house. The house was old and not very convenient, but Robert never complained. I appreciated him for that. This is why I enjoyed our newlywed life. However, our blissful married life soon faced an unexpected turn. One day, my mother-in-law visited us and said, "We want to move out of our current apartment. Can we stay here until we find a new place?" Her family included herself, my father-in-law, and my sister-in-law. In other words, 3 people would be moving into our home. I was lost for words. Well, I stuttered, to which my mother-in-law responded with a sly grin. "The contract in our apartment is up soon, and we'd have to break it if we renewed. You'll help us save money, right?" I protested, "But this is also sudden." But she continued, "I'll help with the housework. Sounds good, right?" And just like that, I was forced into living with my husband's family. Luckily, our house was spacious, and we had rooms to spare. There would be no problem accommodating everyone. And from my perspective as someone who kept working after marriage, having my mother-in-law's help with housework seemed like a good thing. But I couldn't shake off the fear that living together might strain our currently pleasant relationship. "I hope we can get along well," I mumbled, despite some anxiety. Our cohabitation began. However, living together quickly proved troublesome. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were always goofing around and never helped around the house. Even worse, my father-in-law would come home late at night and demand that I prepare meals. First, I put up with it, but my patience soon wore thin. "Please help me with the housework, mother-in-law." That's what she promised me first. Did I? She feigned innocence. Then my sister-in-law chimed in. "How dare you talk back to your husband's parents? You're so insolent for a daughter-in-law." "But this is my house," I argued. "So what if it's your house? You are our daughter-in-law, aren't you?" "Well, yes, but whatever is our daughter-in-law's is ours, right?" I was too flabbergasted to reply. In the end, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law continued their ways. They partied all the time and never lifted a finger to help around the house. I tried talking to my father-in-law about it, but he said, "You are our daughter-in-law. You should respect us." Excuse me? There's nothing good that comes from a daughter-in-law defying her in-laws. It'll descend in divorce, and you'll be thrown out. My father-in-law seemed to be under some misunderstanding. Surely if I were a stay-at-home wife without a job, I would have concerns about life after divorce. but I have a job and own assets, such as a house and land. Being told to divorce doesn't hurt or itch me in the least. Besides, whether to divorce or not is something my husband and I should discuss and decide, not my in-laws. I was irked, but there was no point in talking back any further. I'll take it as a good thing that I understood they wouldn't listen anyway, I muttered to myself. But it wasn't that easy. When I brought up the subject of moving, both my father-in-law and mother-in-law would change the topic. They'd find this or that reason to keep delaying leaving. Thinking it was strange, I consulted my husband. Do you really think they intend to move out? Now that you mention it, they do seem to be dragging their feet. I don't like the thought of them squatting here indefinitely. They might have a reason. We should look into this. Yeah, let's ask our private detective friend. So, our opinion was settled. At any cost, if we had to pay for the move, we wanted my mother-in-law and sister-in-law out. That was my first wish. About a month after that, one day when I was about to scold my mother-in-law, who still wasn't doing anything, she came out with this first. Summer, I want to apologize to you for always causing you trouble. Apologize? Why don't we take a family trip together? That was her proposal. After moving in, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had done nothing and left everything up to me. Far from that, they seemed to regret their haughty attitudes and pushing the housework onto me. So, they thought they should apologize. It seemed they discussed and concluded that a bonding trip would be the best. Needless to say, I thought if they felt that way, they should leave. But it was hard to complain to someone who was being humble. I chose a conciliatory approach. Both of us may have misunderstandings. It might be nice to go on a trip. Do you agree? My mother-in-law was so delighted, then my sister-in-law also happily added, We were thinking of an overseas trip. Where would you like to go? Anywhere is fine. Well, we'll decide. Oh, right. Suddenly, my sister-in-law interrupted herself. She turned to me with an apologetic look. See, we don't have any money right now. Huh, you don't have money? They had no money but proposed a trip? Really, they were exasperating people. That aside, saying that they had no money could only mean one thing. As I was thinking, the exact words I expected came out of my sister-in-law's mouth. Could you lend us some money? Just as I was thinking to refuse, my mother-in-law said something unexpected. Your dad is retiring, so he will receive a retirement bonus. We can pay with that. You just have to front the money for now. Bye, Dad. She means my father-in-law. Given his age, his retirement was indeed due. Moreover, the retirement bonus wasn't a mere presumption. It's a guaranteed sum of money that will surely come. Although I was slightly suspicious, I thought the money would definitely come in. And the matter we were discussing on our side required a bit more time. So it might be better to accept my mother-in-law's invitation and avoid causing tension between us. So, I accepted the idea of the trip. After that, I was informed by my mother-in-law and sister-in-law that they had decided on England as our destination. The flight departs at noon from JFK International Airport. Understood. And it seems like the trip is going to cost quite a bit. But as we said before, can you front the money for us? Yes, I'll cover it. Even though it was just running the money, it was not a small sum. But at this point, I couldn't say no. Moreover, it seems like they've already made the reservation, so I might as well enjoy it. I gave the requested amount to my mother-in-law. Then, on the day of the trip, the meeting time was 3 hours before our flight. My husband, Robert, who had been working the previous day, was staying at a hotel near the airport. Therefore, he was not with me. On the bus heading to the airport, I decided to try calling Robert. At that moment, a call came from Robert's phone before I could call him. Hello, Robert. Are you awake? I spoke, thinking it was my husband, but it was my mother-in-law's voice I heard over the phone. Summer, where are you now? Mother-in-law, yes. Where are you? I'm on the bus heading to the airport. That's unfortunate. We're about to get on the plane now. What? I was confused. Then my mother-in-law, with a sarcastic voice, Drop this bombshell. Actually, we're leaving at 9. Sorry, you lied to me. It's a family trip, so we're going to enjoy just as a family. What about my ticket? Canceling right on the day of departure? Is that fine? You were never included in the plan. My mother-in-law laughed loudly. Apparently, this was all part of her plan. As I clutched my phone in frustration, my sister-in-law's voice came on. Are you upset? You're upset, aren't you? Do you enjoy this kind of thing? It's fun. By now? At that moment, the line went dead with a strange noise, and the call was cut off. Immediately, I called back my husband. I could hear the ringing, but it wouldn't connect. Ultimately, I arrived at the airport just before the flight's departure time. When I asked the airport staff, they said that the plane had already entered the runway. There was nothing I could do but see the plane off. It would take a little over 15 hours for the plane I waved goodbye to arrive at its destination, and my mother-in-law and her cohorts would be back in about 10 days. I had plenty of time. Play games with me, and I'll show you who's the better player. I went straight home. I immediately contacted a demolition company and asked them to tear down my house. I also contacted a moving company to haul out all the belongings in the house. But it wasn't just my stuff in the house. There were things belonging to my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law. And because this was so sudden, I didn't have a new home ready. After some consideration, I decided to use one of the warehouses that was part of my grandfather's inheritance. This warehouse was something my grandfather had used for his business, and nobody was using it now. However, there was a large parking lot in front of the warehouse, which was currently being used by the people in the neighborhood. I had everything moved to that warehouse. After that, I notified my parents that I was going to rebuild the house. My parents asked why, but I told them I'd explain the details later and hung up the phone. I finally had a chance to take a breather when it was late at night. I had just fallen asleep when I noticed my phone ringing. It was an unknown number, and it was early morning, still dim outside. I hesitated but decided to answer the phone. Hello, is this Summer? The person on the phone was my husband, Robert. What do you want now? I replied. Sorry, has your fever gone down now? He asked. What? What are you talking about? I was confused. I heard you had a high fever, Robert explained. As I listened more carefully to my husband's story, I could see my mother-in-law's careful maneuvers. Apparently, Robert had been told the correct meeting time. In other words, because the meeting time was early in the morning, he had purposely stayed at a hotel near the airport. When he went there at the meeting time, he quickly noticed that I wasn't there. When he asked my mother-in-law about it, she told him that I had gone to the hospital with a high fever. Robert was worried about me, but he thought he couldn't call the hospital. Furthermore, my mother-in-law pretended to be passing on a message from me and told Robert to enjoy the trip. So he thought he would enjoy the trip for my sake and departed without contacting me. But I guess my mother-in-law knew that Robert would call me eventually. I thought aloud. She called me on Robert's phone just before departure. After they had riled me up, my sister-in-law pretended to accidentally break Robert's phone. Robert believed my sister-in-law's words, that it wasn't on purpose, and forgave her on the spot. But during the flight, he realized something was strange and called me as soon as he arrived at the hotel. You've got to be kidding me. Even my sister wasn't on it. What the hell are they doing, Robert? I exclaimed. Are you pissed at what they did? Of course. I was looking forward to going on the trip with you, Summer, he replied. So it seems that Robert had nothing to do with it, I concluded. If that was the case, I decided to get my husband's cooperation. I discussed the ongoing plan with Robert. So that's how things are moving, I said. I see. That sounds interesting, he responded. I've prepped everything, Robert. You just need to act like you're enjoying the trip, I instructed. Understood, he confirmed. And I have one favor to ask, I added. A few souvenirs, that was. Bring back some souvenirs for me, and also some for my colleagues, I requested. This was my only concern. Whenever one goes on a trip, it's customary to bring back souvenirs for colleagues at my workplace. In fact, I had even been asked to buy some branded items. I could say I was left behind, but that would be too embarrassing. It was a dilemma for me. But if Robert was on my side, it would change the situation. Now everything was settled. I provided the list of souvenirs to Robert and focused on what I needed to do. After sunrise, I had a demolition team come over. After getting a quote, they immediately began tearing down the house. The work finished quickly, and the plot of land was cleared in no time. A few days later, my in-laws returned home. They started causing a commotion in front of the empty plot of land. Then they called me and started complaining nonstop. That's the whole story. Did you understand? I asked. You've got to be kidding, my mother-in-law yelled again. But even so, my mother-in-law was just on the other side of the phone. I wasn't scared at all, so I calmly retorted, well, it's pointless to say anything now. I've already demolished the house. What happened to our belongings? Did you dispose of them? She demanded. No, I didn't dispose of them. I'm keeping them, I asserted. You are nothing but a thief, she accused. I'm only keeping them. I'll return them if you pay, I clarified. Pay for what? She queried. For the trip and the moving costs. You did say you would at least pay for the trip, didn't you? I reminded her. She hesitated. See, you should pay up soon, I insisted. At that, my mother-in-law fell silent. It seemed she was at a loss for a reply. Then I heard my sister-in-law whispering from behind her. At once, my mother-in-law asked me energetically, before anything, I wanted to know if our belongings are safe. Where did you take them? They are in the warehouse my grandfather used to use. Anyway, I won't return them unless you pay, I declared. But your husband's retirement pension is coming, isn't it? She tried to negotiate. That, yes, but, she stammered. Then please pay me back. I'll return your belongings once you do, I proposed. With that, I hung up. Still, my mother-in-law kept calling incessantly. Finally annoyed, I blocked all her calls. Feeling refreshed, my husband Robert arrived at the weekly mansion where I was staying. I'm back, Summer, he announced. Welcome back. Did you bring any souvenirs? I inquired. Of course I did, he replied. Thank you, I said gratefully. I had considered returning to my parents' home. However, I didn't want to worry them, so I informed my parents that we would be living in a weekly mansion for a while as we were rebuilding our house. Then I actually rented the weekly mansion and moved there. I've been staying in touch with Robert regularly and had informed him about the move, so after his return, he came directly to me. My in-laws must have found it strange that he was acting separately. I was nervous about getting found out, but I'm glad things worked out this way. By the way, Summer, if you get money from Mom, do you plan to forgive her? Robert asked. If she promises not to interfere in our lives in the future, I plan to return her belongings and forgive her. I'm just wondering if she'll pay up without a fuss, I admitted. Don't worry, the warehouse is locked, and she can't take anything out without paying me back. There's no way to get into the locked warehouse. If they think it's possible, they'll give up and pay. I was confident about this. However, I couldn't expect a reasonable response from my in-laws who lack common courtesy. I was reminded of this the following early morning. My phone rang in the dim morning hours. Oh, at this hour, I muttered sleepily. It was another unknown number. When I answered the call, the person on the other side said, I'm sorry for calling so early in the morning. I'm from the police. Police? I instantly woke up, sitting upright and listening intently to the conversation. There had been a disturbance at my grandfather's warehouse. A local resident who uses the warehouse parking lot had reported it. When the police arrived, they found an intruder causing a ruckus in the warehouse and apprehended them. So, you've caught the culprit, I said. But the intruder says they're a family member of the warehouse owner. They asked us to contact the owner, the officer explained. Wait, my family? I had a bad feeling. When Robert and I rushed to the scene, several police cars were parked there, and in one of them were my in-laws. Summer, help us, my mother-in-law pleaded. My suspicions were confirmed. The intruders were my in-laws. Are these individuals indeed your family? The police asked. They are, technically, I reluctantly admitted. Robert and I apologized profusely to the police officer and the local people who had heard the commotion. After apologizing, we heard my in-laws' side of the story with the police officer present. This was my in-laws' story. They claimed they didn't have enough money to cover the moving and travel expenses I had asked for. Apparently, they had spent my father-in-law's retirement funds on traveling and repaying their own debts. That was challenging enough, but then my sister-in-law chimed in with, "I've got a blind date tomorrow. Where are my clothes?" After some squabbles, they decided to take just what they needed from the warehouse. That's why the three of them broke into it. But once inside, they found photos of us partying with men, mixed in with our belongings. This was a result of the investigation I had commissioned. In fact, when Robert and I asked a private detective to investigate my in-laws, it turned out that my mother-in-law and sister-in-law had been goofing around with men from the nightlife industry, pouring quite a lot of money into them. They had even taken on debts, some of which they repaid using my father-in-law's retirement funds. On the other hand, my father-in-law was having an affair with a younger woman from his workplace. Despite the nice ring to his retirement, the truth was that he had been fired for his affair. I received these reports and photo evidence just before my in-laws left for the trip. When they returned, I planned to use this as leverage to kick them out. But with things turning out this way, I had moved the photos to the warehouse along with my stuff. So they broke into the warehouse, found the photos we had investigated, and that led to a fight over each other's misbehavior. Seems like that's the punchline of this whole fiasco. They totally brought this on themselves, I murmured. My mother-in-law shouted at me in anger. What were you planning by taking these photos? Like I care, I retorted. My father-in-law yelled, "What have you done? This could ruin our family." "Well, that's your fault, isn't it?" I snapped back. "What? How dare you as a daughter-in-law?" he fumed. "Enough. If you have complaints, I'll sue you for trespassing," I warned. Realizing this, the three of them promptly quieted down. However, it was clear that none of them had the means to pay me back, so I proposed another option to them. "Would you rather work at a cannery to pay me back or get arrested for trespassing?" Predictably, they chose the former, and I managed to get them jobs at a friend's cannery. They're working there every day now, earning the money they owe me. Meanwhile, I rebuilt a house on the land where my grandfather's house once stood. It's a brand new house that still retains traces of my grandfather's house. Robert and I are starting our married life anew in this convenient new home.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. "Still here?" Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. "I'm leaving." I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick? What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office, angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hope to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.